So I just want to reiterate the title of our topic tonight and introduce briefly the panelists, but I'll go in more detail about their background as we move forward. But I hope everyone's having a good time. So this is called The Entertainment Industry, the story of everything, from franchise movies and TV to virtual reality and smartphones. So there's a lot to cover here. And I want to introduce our panelist here, Charles Segars, who is CEO Ovation TV, executive producer. He did the National Treasure franchise, and he's an advisor to DreamWorks Animation, so he'll be able to tell us a little bit about that. Next to him is Josh McLaughlin, EVP of production at Focus Features, and I'm so grateful to have him here. He's one of the stars in Hollywood now in terms of production and development. Next to him is Paula Cufford, Senior Vice President, Worldwide Promotion Consumer Products at Lionsgate. She's behind the scene doing the deals to help create revenues for the films going globally. Next is Tammy Glover. She's a production executive at Turner Broadcast. She was also at Fremantle, and before that, Comedy Central. But I'm going to talk about all of them as we go along. And next to her is Ron Fisher, a motion capture developer at Weta. And he and I work together at Universal on a production stage, so we'll talk about that. And over on my left is Hamilton Brown, one of the best in terms of branding. He came from P&G, he's also worked at Taco Bell, is doing some consulting. And he's one of the most talented. He speaks around the country on branding, so we're going to circle back to the concept of consumer with him. And to my right is Rami Yani, who's SVP in terms of legal business and legal affairs at Saban Brands. And so we want to get started. And is everybody ready to participate and get involved with everything we're doing? Can I hear that? Yes. Cool. So I'm going to start with a simple exercise a little bit just to introduce you and get you going. How many of you seen The Matrix? How many of you seen that? How many of you love that movie? Right? Well, I think one of the core pieces is that moment where they make a decision between the red pill and the blue pill. And so symbolically, I have Rami with the blue pill over here and Hamilton with the red pill. And so what I do concept modeling, which is the extraction of the concept from ideas. And I do that in film, technology, and business. And instead of talking about it in the abstract, I'd like to show you what the difference is between an idea and a concept. And I think that goes back to the Matrix, of taking that pill, kind of seeing the world a little bit differently, right? So how many of you know the music from the film Jaws? Everyone? So think about it for a second. Why does everybody in the world know that piece of music, right? There have been thousands of films, and that's really significant. Still 40 years later, everyone knows that. So I'm going to show you the difference between an idea and a concept using that music, but I need your help, all right? So on the left side, from here over, table 19, over, I want you guys to make the sound of a heartbeat as loud as you can. You're going to compete against that side of the room. So let's do it. Ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump. Come on, loud. Ba-bump, ba-bump. The winner gets a prize. Ba-bump. Great. Now on the right side, going over from table 4, I want you to do the sound that you hear in Jaws. Ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. Brownie, get them to do it. Ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. Great. Now, stop for a second and get ready because you're going to compete for the prize. But I want you to understand the music is the idea, but the concept underneath that music is what makes it work. And many of you know this already, but how many of you know that music is based on a heartbeat? Do we all know that? That's what makes it unique. So you're swimming in that water midnight, and suddenly the audience hears there's another heartbeat here, right? But this is the reason why you concept it. That's just one level of 3 things that make that music work. So the second thing you need to know is that heartbeat is not human. It's the reverse of a heartbeat. So if you hear it, you know that what's swimming around is not human. And that's what gives us fear. So let's try to do it. Let's see which side of the room, right, can do it the loudest. And by the way, there's a third thing. And that's what's really scary about that music, because the heartbeat you're hearing is not relaxed, right? It's not swimming around the algae, taking its time. It's a heartbeat on a mission, right? It's speeding up. So what the artist does in terms of the music is he's going to emphasize that. So I'm going to do that piece. So our judges here are going to decide which side of the room wins, and I'm going to add that piece that makes the music work conceptually. All right, so let's go. Let's get started on the left side. Ba bump, ba bump, ba bump, ba bump, ba bump, and get da da. Come on, louder, louder. And if you remember, this is the other piece. There we go. Okay, so which side of the room won? There we go. It looks like these guys are the winners, so give your hands and play. So pass out. You get pass out. And as consolation prize, get those passed out too on the right side to some of the tables there. But that's the way concept works, right? You know, we have a great director here, David Zucker, you know, and great artists, right? They reach deeper. They go into that intuitive layer. So in the physical world, you touch things with your hand. In the concept world, you touch it with intuition. So I want to show you in our society a little bit of the difference with the idea and concept in the technical world. So how many of you know who the Wright brothers are? Raise your hand. Okay, look around the room, almost everybody, right? But how many of you know who Sir George Cayley is? Look around the room. Anybody? Anybody? Sir George Cayley? So that distinction is the distinction between an idea and a concept. You see, the Wright brothers actually built a machine that catered to the concept of flight. And that concept, unbelievably, was discovered by Sir George Cayley 104 years before the Wright brothers. So if we shift your thinking, you start separating idea from the concept, it's a way to perfect technology, film, and other things. And then I'm going to give you one example on film. How many of you saw Shawshank Redemption? How many of you love that movie? So here's the concept question. How many of you in this room have been accused of murder, put in prison for life, and escaped 30 years later, one scratch at a time? There are those two. Let me talk to you right after. Just stay outside, right? So that's the amazing thing about film and technology, right? Is that all it is, story-wise, is a prison break film. You're in prison and you what? You get out, right? But none of us in your audience have that experience. So how does that film connect with so many people? Well, for me, it's the concept underneath that. And I don't know if you know what it is, but that concept is hope. And that's the area that I work on films, right? I didn't do that film, but I deconstruct the concept. So that concept is hope. So what you have to do is deconstruct that. So how do you talk about hope? When you talk about a table, you have it right in front of you, right? You say the size, dimensions, look how sturdy. When you talk about hope, you talk about it in its absence. That's what's amazing. So all the characters relate to hope. One is losing hope, one has lost hope, one has it, but he's killed, so it's cut off. And then the main character, protagonist, he's really like us. Every day a flat tire, problem at work, you have to pay your taxes, all these things, right, that are kind of beating us down. But he scratched every day showing hope, hope, hope every day. So when you see that 4-foot wall, you realize how much hope he had to have to dig out of that for all those years. And that's what connects films to us. So with that, what we want to do through the panel is look at the different aspects of film, from film to production to television. We have some of the best promotions and marketing people behind the scenes, as well as finally the consumer, because at the end of the day, all this is driven towards the consumer. So I want to introduce again some of our panelists as we go along to tell you a little bit more insight on them. And I kind of want to start with Charles and Josh, but Charles Segars, right? I've known him for quite a while. He's always been on the cutting edge of business. He was there at the Food Channel and launched Fine Living, and it was one of the first real networks to actually combine content with web. So now you're seeing that everywhere. He also launched one of the most successful franchises at that time for Disney with National Treasure. and I think he may be able to tell us a little bit about what's happening there. But one of the things you may not know is that he's a consultant for DreamWorks and Amblin, and for me, he's one of the smartest businessmen behind the scenes in entertainment, and I think you'll see that. And Josh, right, Executive VP for production from Focus, he's had an unusual career in the sense of he's both skilled in terms of production as well as development, right? So at Chernin, I think that's where you're doing the development, right? And Mark Gordon, you are doing the production. So I'm going to ask you about Focus Features is unique. They're doing these meaty movies, right, that are sort of socially significant as part of their blend. So I kind of want to talk to you about where your vision in terms of Focus Features is and where you see it. But so with that, perhaps Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about Focus Features?
Sure. One, I've never been accused of being on the cutting edge of anything, so sitting next to someone. I feel like in a room full of digital people, being the person who's still in the Luddite field of film, I feel like I'm slightly out of place. I can tell you at Focus, particularly when we're talking about starting, and for some of the students or people who are sort of in their postgrad, starting from scratch when it comes to stories specifically, some of what you said is interesting because it's definitely how we approach everything that we're considering, from a newspaper article to a book to something that has a director attached.
Right.
And I think the thing that they need to have for me, I can't speak to everyone at the company, but for me to get interested in, and I think I can reference some of the Focus movies that I think perform very well, had traditionally, is they had a universal story to tell at their core. Brokeback Mountain is a love story. Eternal Sunshine is a love story. Theory of Everything is a movie about marriage, in large part.
Right.
And then what they did was, and I think this is the scripts that we end up trying to pursue, or the stories that we find ourselves gravitated toward, is they found a unique point of view into that story. And I think the reason for that isn't just, I think maybe 10 years ago it was because that's what we preferred.
Right.
I would say 10 years later, it's out of necessity because of a lot of the other sort of mediums that are in this room.
Right.
In that 15 years ago when Focus started, if you wanted to go see or you wanted to consume something like Constant Gardener, I'll use that as an example. Now, that was an adaptation of a John le Carré novel. It had a terrific director on it. And the hidden secret of that type of business at that time was, in order to consume something on film like Constant Gardener, you had to go to the movies or rent Constant Gardener. Unless you had access to some European television, it really didn't exist yet in popular culture on television. There were great television shows, but they weren't necessarily a John le Carré style television show. Now, cut to 15 years later, The Honorable Woman is in the exact same milieu, and frankly, there's 8 more hours of it. And part of the cultural conversation has shifted to these digital ways of telling stories and breaking them down in smaller parts. So the way to sort of compete in that market is to have stories that have something, and maybe when you're starting from scratch, something that feels universal, and then something within that story that an audience, when they see a commercial or they read a review or maybe they have the chance to, their friend sees it, something that feels wildly unique about the way into it.
Is that impacting your social media strategy in the sense of how you're developing your audience ahead of time, or is that natural?
I mean, in some ways yes, and in some ways no, meaning I think we're still always, and that's why I said it feels like being somewhat of the traditional leftover remnant of a film business. In some ways, we are always starting from story first, and always starting from then director, and then the movie. And then at that point, telling that story in another way becomes, I don't want to say a have to, but it doesn't dictate from one end to the other. It's always the story that dictates up.
And tell me, is there issues in terms of scheduling? Because now I want to talk to Charles a little bit about franchises and these big tentpole films, right? I mean, recently, you know, Disney has been on a great roll, right, with animation and then Star Wars and things like that. And I was wondering, in terms of scheduling, you know, how far in advance you have to schedule, you know, your type of films, right? And does it make it harder to find an audience that way?
There's always those 3 months of the year when a certain type of audience member, the type of person that goes for maybe 1 or 2 movies a year, is more apt to go to the movies, and it's between, call it, November 1 to the end of the year. Some would say mid-October to the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Of course, the problem with that is everybody wants to put a certain kind of movie in that space.
Right.
So the question becomes, where else in the year does I don't want to even say a grown-up audience, but does the audience for specialty movies, where else does it come out?
Right.
And on occasion it's summertime, and on occasion there's a few movies in the spring. We had Midnight Special. We didn't have that film, but we had Everybody Wants Some this spring, Eye in the Sky. You know, there's a gap between sort of March and the beginning of the summer season where you can find space, but of course, fitting in there becomes a complicated thing.
And is your brand helping you? Focus is such a great brand now. Is that?
I mean, I think we have almost 15 years in February of doing it. Mm-hmm. So I would say yes, but only to a certain consumer. I would argue that most of us are regular Joe consumers, and frankly, a brand only goes so far. And that core concept or that core idea has to resonate in some ways.
Right.
And frankly, I think for everybody who makes a certain type of film, specialty movies being the one I'm speaking about.
Right.
I think the reviews that now help the consumer, I'll use me, someone who's got 2 kids and not a lot of time on my hands.
Right.
The review that has become the one that I'm most interested in is when I ask someone about a movie where their instant reaction is personal. It's, I did this, I did that. I laughed, I was moved, I went and talked about it with my friends afterwards.
Right.
Over the years, I found that the reviews that don't necessarily work anymore are when someone tells me it was great.
Right.
That movie was great.
Right.
And I find myself 2 months later going, why didn't I go see that in the movie theater? And I think it's because in some ways the person didn't tell me something was going to happen. They didn't say for $14, something's going to happen to you in that movie. And I think that's the thing you try to capture.
So it's really that personal connection. Yeah. So Charles, maybe you can talk about franchises, where you see it's going, how does it fit in, is it that same personal connection that you're looking for, right?
I'm not so sure it's a personal connection. I think franchise business, if you say you make a movie for $225 million, you probably have to spend another $100 million of hard cost marketing. You probably have another 50 to 60 million in-kind marketing because you have such a big franchise that, you know, Audi or BMW and all the other people who want to be a part of that particular franchise will spend millions of dollars of their own media to tie their car into your action scene and then buy a lot of television spots, right? So creating a franchise is about trying to create a great shared experience, meaning that first 4 days, that first opening 4 days is critical. And I think that's where the franchise business has been over the last 10 years. I think what has really been interesting is to watch how franchises keep the digital conversation going between each sequel. Taking the characters, creating digital content around those characters for origin stories, always feeding sort of the marketplace and fanboy base and fangirl base to keep those franchises alive. And I think that's been an extraordinary opportunity for many content creators who understand the digital space and the many platforms to keep that conversation going and tell those stories.
And Paula, I wanted to kind of pull you into this conversation. Paula does the partnerships and promotions at Lionsgate. She's actually responsible for developing and closing deals with from Subway to Coca-Cola to Procter & Gamble and also Frito-Lay and Amazon. And I want to, your role, she's generated over $250 million behind the scenes in terms of these deals. And it's also the deals that create promotion globally for these big tentpole films, right? Which obviously Lionsgate is known for, Twilight, The Hunger Games, right, and Divergent series. So how do you see this connection with franchises? How does your work support that?
Well, in the perfect scenario, you
Is
can
that-
have
Technology.
in the perfect scenario, you do have things lined up just like you were describing, where you have product placement, where you have a brand that's in the movie and they get all excited and they spend all of those millions of dollars, and which is fantastic. You also have other franchises. We didn't have the opportunity with the Hunger Games to place Cars and bubblegum, but we still had to market a franchise and tell a story, and there was still a tremendous amount of opportunity for brands to partner with us. And in the digital space is where a lot of that opportunity was generated. Where when we were marketing the Hunger Games, it was really a story that we are telling, that we looked at from the first film, always looking through all of the films, each film, we're part of that story. One of my favorite partnerships was actually with Procter & Gamble, with CoverGirl, where, it was totally inappropriate and inauthentic for Katniss to be a CoverGirl. I would have had pie thrown in my face in the street. However, we came up with an authentic storyline with Capital, which was also a really interesting theme, and made a Capital collection. And what that generated through partnership was content where you're making ofs, but we had a Tumblr blog that was a complete Capital montage that integrated the real world with the Hunger Games world, and it allowed partners like CoverGirl and Samsung and others to have a voice and then go and create their own content. We also partnered with Google, for example, where they brought in influencers and influencers created their own campaigns from the perspective of each of the districts, and then launched that on Capital TV as an interesting content play. If we would have just paid for that out of our pockets at Lionsgate, it would have been millions and millions and millions of dollars that wasn't going to the film campaign. However, through partnership, we benefited through the funding of content distributed through YouTube, promoted by Google, integrated with partners such as CoverGirl and Samsung, and we're really able to do something special. Right. And the digital space and the ecosystem that you're able to build with franchises and integrate partners to help you offset those costs and expand your audience will continue to be a tremendous opportunity.
So obviously a way to defray costs, right, to expand the dollar, to also connect with your consumer. And I kind of want to bring Hamilton into this discussion because he's one of the best in the world in terms of branding and marketing. He speaks around the country. He was at Procter & Gamble and he handled Tag and Gain, but the one I love to hear about is Old Spice, where he turned that from doing okay to a global brand, and he's very insightful on the consumer. Right? And I think that's the change that's happening, is that films, franchises, have to reach their consumer through social media ahead of time, right? Because obviously word of mouth spreads, and suddenly those critics and everything, all those things enhance the value and how long the run is. But Hamilton, what do you see as the future of consumers? How are they changing? What would you say?
Is my mic on? Hi. Good evening, everyone. I think the future that the stage that we're about to enter into is this democratization of storytelling and content. And I think that as brands are able to express their purpose and their soul in an authentic way, and you tie that with the ability to entertain, to motivate, and be authentic, and be at the intersection point of where culture is driven, i.e. music, food, technology, sports, entertainment, etc., you will be able to survive. Right. And I think you gave a perfect example around how CoverGirl was able to integrate in their authentic way of everyone can be a CoverGirl. But as you look at the fans and how they're delighted with the makeup that is done in the Capital collection, each consumer can express their own version of how they want to look inspired by that movie. But it's authentic to the brand in terms of CoverGirl and making everyone a CoverGirl. And it's also authentic to the essence of how the Hunger Games stayed true to its purpose of creating great visual content and storytelling in an authentic way. So I think that brands who get it will be able to not only survive, but thrive in the future in terms of democratizing their content. How can I allow the fan that loves us to be co-writers of the storytelling of our brand and be merchandisers of what we do as a brand in an authentic way, because you have your own audience as well. I often talk about the fact that Generation Z is all about their favorite brands that they often quote as themselves. And the way they align themselves with other brands is if that brand can help them build their brand because they can self-express. So taking the reins off of your brand, i.e., and the way you do that is by being very clear about what you stand for, what your purpose is, and your essence, will work. And then you'll be free to open up those reins. In my days on Old Spice, we had this awesome, big, glorious brand purpose of helping guys navigate the seas of manhood. If I ask every gentleman in here tonight, you can tell me an Old Spice story. My father used it, or someone else used it. Anywhere I went around the world, and I traveled all over the world doing this brand, the way we were able to make the next generation of consumers, the next generation of lovers of the brand, was to make it relevant to them now. And we had to overcome several barriers to do that. The old musky scent and the old man-looking brand, we made it new again. And we brought in characters, and everyone talks about the Man Your Man Can Smell Like campaign, and how the guy on the horse, Mr. Isaiah Mustafa, that was the tip of the iceberg in terms of putting the brand in folks' hands. We knew we had it when we were able, as a brand, to help a guy live his life. A young man wrote into us and said, hey, listen, I love you so much. Could you ask on my behalf the woman I love to marry me?
Here we go. Yeah.
And we did it.
That's-
We made it happen. We brought Isaiah in. We shot a video. We asked him to ask the woman he loved to marry him. We knew we created a lover of the brand and a whole host of lovers of the brand. That's why the brand is winning all over the world and is tied into culture and driving relevance.
So you're talking about a product, right? So obviously I want to go back to Paula in this sense, is that who decides the film in terms of what you're going to say about that film? And how do you decide what's going to work? Like when you go to CoverGirl, is that the director? You're coming up with these ideas?
Well, in our case, our CMO sets the vision and the sort of the story that he wants to tell with the marketing campaign, with the beats that in some cases can be 6 months in advance, sometimes 2 years in advance, and sometimes what feels like forever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my responsibility to translate that strategy to the brands with ideas. And it's a great fun process. It's like getting paid to go to school, because you have to learn about what does each brand at Procter & Gamble care about, and what is their authentic message and story and consumer and all of that. And you have to go to them with legitimate ideas that are executable and creative and smart, and sell your freaking face off.
Now, Josh, I want to ask you, because one, the film has a brand, right? And we were sort of touching upon that before, but Focus has a great brand as well. And I was wondering, how does that play into, suddenly this loyalty to, like Disney has loyalty to it, right?
Sure.
DreamWorks is also, we're going to ask Charles. Yeah.
I mean, I think we definitely would approach it slightly different in that we have always been so wildly filmmaker driven that when it comes to each product, it's I won't even say product because I'd get fined
Film.
at the office. It's
Right.
film. When it comes to each film, each one has its own moment in the sun in the marketing of the movie. Focus as a whole, I think the bubbles and when they come down, people have a certain warmth because of a nostalgia for a movie they've seen in the past.
Right.
And they're hoping it's going to be like a Brokeback Mountain or Lost in Translation. But each film becomes much more filmmaker driven in that our CMO would start with the filmmaker. What did you want to make the movie about? Like, why did you do this? What's it about? What do you want the audience to take from it? And then after that initial conversation, then they come back with their sort of, well, this is what I see, these are the people I think it's for. And then we start to sort of micro market to that group of people. And I think as a difference from maybe creating a franchise or a level of awareness, someone I work with, actually the president of Focus, Jim Burke, likes to say, when you're making a specialty movie, you need to turn people into evangelists. Like we're going to have the money to create a wave. We have to create a bunch of people who
Create the
literally
wave.
will be evangelical for the movie.
Right, create
And
the wave for you.
literally, yeah. And because the only way to get people to see something like, not our movie, I'll use Room as an example because of how complicated it was to try to explain to someone, was to literally grab them and say, it's fantastic, I was crying, I was
Right.
moved, you have to go see this movie. And I think that's a different kind of consumer
Yeah.
who you need to turn into your own advocate.
Right. And Charles, being a consultant with DreamWorks, what about that brand? Now you've heard the news that some changes have made. Maybe you can talk to that and how the brand changes now going forward?
Well, I have no clarity in how the brand's going to change. I do know there's a lot of brand equity in the word DreamWorks. There's a lot of brand equity and trust, I think, from families. When they see the DreamWorks label, they know there's going to be quality. I think they can trust it, and I don't think Comcast will mess with that. I do want to say one thing about Focus, which is interesting, is that, you know, as independent film and smaller films, you know, there's a huge audience out there, but they are all asynchronous. You know, they're never going to go to the theater at the same time to give a great opening weekend. It's very, very rare on small movies, and it would probably cost too much, or it's getting cost prohibitive to get people there. But I also think a brand like Focus has a great opportunity to be a great aggregator and curator of all things that are great storytelling and all things that are great, you know, socially relevant and exciting and out of the ordinary. And I think that's the exciting thing about what digital is bringing, is that I can find right now 225,000 minimum. There's a great company called Relish Mix. I don't know if anybody's here from there, but where are they? So these guys are great, right? You know, in the world of giving clarity into the social conversations around, you know, movies, beyond what they can do with the big franchises, you know, they can find great audiences for smaller movies, but you got to get ahead of it, and you got to interact with them every day with some sort of interesting piece of content and something that they get excited about, which is very difficult. But I think that's really the difference, is the smaller movies are going to be asynchronous. We're all going to see The Room, but it's going to take 4 years to aggregate an audience of what would be a $50 million or $100 million box office.
Right.
Whereas the big franchises are going to shove that thing down your throat. And I can promise you they're either going to win that first 3 days or they're gone.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
And that's the
right?
difference.
A lot of pressure in those
Yeah.
first 3 days.
Extraordinary pressure.
Tammy worked at Comedy Central on shows like Josh, right, Point O, and then went to Fremantle, and obviously Fremantle's known for American Idol. She's been behind the scenes, you know, with Fremantle, and suddenly with the end of American Idol, she went to TBS. So I want to get your perspective. You know, what is the audience?
Applicable, relevant, real-world example for how TBS was able to cut through with our rebrand. So we have a number of shows that are brand new, and television is a very cluttered marketplace at the moment. And so, you know, everyone is trying to figure out how to launch these shows, what kind of marketing campaign, you know, to your points, the practical experience of getting in a room with the creators. And then normally you would roll out you'd have a marketing campaign, and you would roll out a 10-episode series over the course of 10 or 12 weeks if you you know, had a couple interruptions in your programming. And so earlier this year, with our first TBS rebranded show, which was Angie Tribeca, we all got in a room to figure out how we could make some noise, and we decided that we would marathon our show, hire social influencers to come in and blog about it. We partnered with brands to offset our being able to run it commercial free, and then we ran the show back-to-back episodes and did an old-fashioned telethon where we literally set up a phone bank, and this evolved. We had a very short period of time to produce this show, but we did it live, and it was massively successful. I don't know if it ended up on any of your radar if you watched the show, but you know, there's a lot of love for Rashida Jones, the rest of our cast, and it was very, very successful way to become part of the cultural conversation, which is what every brand, every television show, every studio is trying to do. So that's one example.
Very cool. And I was going to ask Rami. Rami works with Saban Brands, and he's doing the deals behind, right, the contracts for the Power Rangers and television area. Just wondering, are the deals getting more complicated? Are you having, is it harder to do? A long time ago, you just had one sponsor. Now, tell us about your perspective, in television.
Yes.
Yes, answer. Okay, and next
Thank you.
question.
Next question. How many people here are familiar with the Power Rangers? Show of hands.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, and I can't see you over that side. Okay. How many people here at some point in your life wore a Power Rangers costume on Halloween? Show of hands.
There we go.
Okay. Now, how many of you can be honest about this? I only saw 3 hands. The other 40 of you. So, the deals are getting more complicated. To answer your question, Power Rangers is a franchise. Many of you are familiar with it. It's the introduction, it's the preschool and kindergarten age introduction to the superhero genre. That's what Power Rangers represents. And it's a franchise that's been around for 23 years. And the business, like the media business across the board, film, television, has become infinitely more complex than it was when Power Rangers launched in 1993. And we now have gone from what everyone thinks of, as first screen linear television to being on Netflix, being on Amazon, and those second screens are as important as what's going on linear television, on Nickelodeon in the US and various other television distributors around the world. And like many franchises, it doesn't stop at the content. Power Rangers has a huge fandom. We have fans that have been following the show since they were 5, 6, 7 years old. They are now 28, 30 years old. And those fans are driving a lot of the brand equity for Power Rangers. There's a huge digital presence for Power Rangers. There's a digital community, bloggers, super fans that create their own websites based on our franchise. And even though I am by training an intellectual property lawyer, we do not go after all these people and take them down, because there's huge brand equity in allowing our fans to express themselves through our Power Rangers branding. And there's a lot of user-generated content, fan-generated or fan-created, produced videos that are all over the internet, and very few of them are taken down. And Winston, I'm going to get back to your answer, but I wanted to give a little bit of background on, back to the answer to your question, a little bit of background of the importance of building brand equity. And this extends all the way, not just beyond screen, to consumer products, to Halloween costumes, to theme parks. You've got the Harry Potter exhibit at, not the exhibit, rather, the Harry Potter experience, attraction. I had to find the word, at Universal. And actually we are looking at a Power Rangers attraction at another theme park operator. So this is the evolution of content beyond the first screen, second screen, digital, user-generated content to consumer products and theme parks. To answer your question, Winston, yes, the contracts are a lot more complicated than they used to be now, because you have all of the digital pieces that have to fold into how we are expanding the brand and distributing the content.
So you're kind of saying that Power Rangers is some people's introduction, right, to superheroes, and I kind of wanted to bring Ron in here. He's a really technical engineer expert, really, on motion capture and kind of the future of where technology is going, right? And obviously that's what's required to do these superhero movies. And I want to start, maybe you can talk about the technology, where it's going. Are these movies going to be too expensive to make, or is the technology making it cheaper, or where's that framework?
Well, it's really funny that you asked the question from that angle, because I was going to go the exact opposite. I was going to say that, look at the bottom end. Look at the brand curated fan media that's being created. You know, it's one of my favorites. It's this show called Star Trek Continues. It's an absolutely faithful reproduction of the original Star Trek series being done by these people out in the U.S. And it's not being taken down by by Paramount. They're staying within bounds, of course, with them. But I mean, the point being that the technology that you have in your pocket now in your cell phone can be used to make feature films. Like the movie Tangerine was shot completely on an iPhone. And not only that, the other thing about this too that's interesting is so there's that aspect that the tools are really available to these people, like the influencers that Google has access to, that the brands can communicate with through companies like that, and the distribution networks that Google has. That's a very powerful thing. These enablers out there who can use this technology, understand, have the time and energy to use it. But then the technology itself is evolving really rapidly too. We have these new technologies like the Lytro cinema camera, which is this behemoth right now. It's about, people say that's ridiculous. It's 700 pounds and it's the size of a Prius. And you go, well, yes, but so was the first Technicolor camera. So it's not, and it's going to get smaller, just like everything else does, and it's going to evolve really quickly. Like when I worked on the Polar Express and all the Zemeckis movies and Christmas Carol, the techniques that we used in that virtual production are still being used at the high end of the feature market in movies like The Jungle Book. But the thing is that that's all accessible to the low-end filmmakers now too. You don't have the time and patience to work with it. None of this stuff is completely out of reach.
Right.
I gave a keynote at a digital media conference in Utah, oddly enough, this morning, and one of the students asked me, what's the advice you can give us, as young animators? And I said, don't let the software get in your way. Don't let the hardware get in your way. Tell your story. That's the most important thing, however you do it. I said, look back at old movies and see how they avoided doing special effects. They just had a reaction shot. When the monster ate somebody, they did this. Right. You didn't show the monster eating somebody. You couldn't afford that. So I said, there's a lot of creative ways to do it. And these guys, they laugh just like you guys did. They'll actually do it. And it'll work for somebody's storytelling. These are the people that aren't afraid. They don't have to get ILM to show the monster eating somebody. Right. They're going to do it because they have no fear. And these are also the ones that are going to do VR and all these other great technologies too.
How many of you watched Godzilla? It's a TV show in the 60s and 70s. You remember that? Do you know one concept that's so critical, that's different than the film itself, was really, do you remember how it was a little bit cheesy, right? You could see, but that's what made it work for kids. That was a key component, because when you're 3 years old and you're seeing monster, the sense that it's not real kind of helped kids love it, right? So suddenly, I think they did a movie at Warner Brothers. What was the movie about the big giants in an island? I forgot no, that's later. That was later. I forgot Where the Wild Things Are, right? And at the first screening, the monsters were so realistic that some of the kids ran out screaming. So with Godzilla, that actually worked really well. It was a little bit cheesy, so you could feel a little bit comfortable if you were a kid. And I was at the introduction to Lytro because of your advice. This is a new camera that's probably going to change the industry, but it may take some time to do it. But it may be also replacing what green screens do. So the technology is always advancing, and some of it's getting more expensive, but as you said, some of it's getting less expensive. And so I think that hits upon the point that Hamilton was making, is that now your audience is able to participate in their way, right, of making their version of it. Right, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about YouTube, right? And Charles, I saw their introduction a few weeks ago at CES, where they talked about Red. I don't know if it's a new program there, but for me, I thought that they made a mistake in not buying Twitch. I don't know if you're familiar with Twitch.
Yeah, no, they tried. They didn't. They got outbid by Amazon. I think, YouTube, I think 3 years ago when Jeffrey Katzenberg and I went up to see them, they swore they would never do a separate app for kids. They did. They swore they would never do an SVOD service. They are and have. I think you'll hear them say they'll never buy sports rights. They will. I think you'll see, we'll never hire television executives to be in our company. They did. And I know I sound a little cynical about YouTube. I will just say this, that there's some very simple evolution that always happens in media. I had a person explain to me what branded engaged content was, about how they put something inside a YouTube video, and that's engagement. And I smile and go, well, Ed Sullivan held up whiskey and cigarettes in 1951. It's all the same thing. It's authentic. They look in the camera. They try to sell you something. So when I look at YouTube, it is a giant platform to reach a lot of people. Are they engaged? You really don't have any idea. Just because somebody has 7 million subscribers doesn't mean they're actually watching all those videos. If it rolls for 3 seconds, that's a view. I'm not so sure that is a really engaged consumer. So I look at it and say, if you're out making content, you're going to have to customize your content about 9 different ways for each available platform. But I will say the common denominator from everybody up here is a frustration with the discovery mechanism. How do we find this content that you make without going broke? And the best way to do it is to find the super fan of the category or genre that you are making your content around. And if you can't get 1,000 people who are sci-fi lovers to like your sci-fi content, then you might have done the wrong story. Doesn't mean you're bad at it, just means you chose unwisely, and I think I've chosen unwisely more than I've chosen wisely when I make content. But being, 50% is a pretty good rate. So if you can get those 1,000 people engaged, excited, authoring, helping author your story, being a part of how you're making it, they become 1,000 of the greatest salespeople for your content to the other 50,000 that love sci-fi. And those 50,000 exponentially start to spread the word. And that's how a lot of this short form content and premium short form content is being discovered. So again, YouTube, great giant funnel to maybe find people. I'm a big fan of Facebook video. I think they've done an extraordinary job of giving you real clarity into who is really looking at different genres and different kind of content and who's very engaged. I'm not such a great fan of Snapchat. I don't know how they're going to figure it out. I get it. But there's a lot of other easier ways to monetize video. I think Snapchat will eventually get there, right? They swore last year they would never do video, and I'm sure they're going to go to video, and I'm sure Snapchat will never do an SVOD service. They're going to do an SVOD service. And it goes the other way. Comcast Cable, the MVPDs, swore they would never be in the broadband business, and they are. They swore they'd never be in the wireless business. They're going to be. But that's all good for everybody making content. It just means that there's somebody spending billions and billions of dollars to make a very small platform grow very large that won't have a lot of friction. Hopefully they get the UI right. And if they get the UI right, your content can sit there and you can actually monetize it. And we're at that point where I think you're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years some giant platforms capturing a lot of people with short form premium content.
How many people know Twitch TV? Anyone? Yes. Okay, cool. For me, that's one of the future platforms, just because of the way we're moving from YouTube, where you had to film it and then put it up there, to actually live streaming, right? In the 60s, you had DJs, and the 80s, you had VJs with MTV. Now you sort of have these game DJs, right, who personalities playing the game. But forget the gaming space. The platform itself is very, very unique. Right? And if you watch TV now and sports, you're starting to see Twitter feeds and all this thing, but that's sort of built into Twitch. And you can have suddenly a show on live very quickly, right? With you as a host, if you have some personality, it can build an audience and kind of, discuss things or movies. I see that happening in the future. They launched music a few months ago, then they went into creative, which is to teach you how to draw or things like that, and then recently they went into food. So I'm wondering if that's going to bust out and there are going to be platforms that way where people are able to discuss films live or discuss behind the scenes on TV show. And I was wondering, Tammy, if you had a feeling about that. How is TBS reaching out, in terms of the internet? Yeah.
I think that we'll be exploring all of it, but we're trying to get traction with new programming and figuring out how to most wisely spend the marketing budget to bring people into those new shows. So it's a case-by-case basis, but this is the kind of stuff that we talk about in meetings about how we're going to launch things all the time.
Right.
And we are making very innovative deals with content creators. Pod deals with people because the technology is so accessible and authenticity is our priority, especially with comedy. Someone's extreme point of view comedy is so subjective, it comes through, and that's what makes a lot, things that are working that we look at and admire are things like Catastrophe. I don't know if anybody has seen that show, but the point of view is so strong in it. We'd love to have things like that on our air, and one way to get that kind of authenticity is to go directly to content creators. And when there's too many people in the room, old-fashioned traditional television deals don't work as well as we can also have more times at bat when we do things like that. Instead of making giant traditional television pilots, we'd rather reach out directly to content creators, give them a smaller amount of money, see what they can do with the technology, and then maybe develop that into a series.
So some ways, you're looking for that authentic voice, right? And
In
so
all ways,
with
yeah.
film, the directors
Well-
that you're picking are the ones that have that voice, right?
Yeah, for
Different.
sure. I mean, the one thing I wanted to say in regards to all of this that I've noticed is like monetizing and turning this stuff into profit and finding your fans and talking about story. Like a lot of the stuff we talk about, Angie Tribeca, for instance, it's gotta be good.
Right.
So, starting from, where are the avenues for trial and error? Where are the avenues for people to, particularly some of the underrepresented voices that were talked about earlier today? Like, we have to find a way to encourage people to tell stories and then help them get better at it.
Right.
And that's sort of with so many different platforms of which to tell something, inevitably you cut through because the first Hunger Games is really good. Like, Marvel works, in my opinion, because Iron Man worked.
Right.
If Iron Man was not a good movie, I don't know where they would be.
Right.
But they took a real outrageous creative risk in that movie and said, we're going to have 65% of the movie he's alone.
Right.
Building the suit, which was an outrageous idea when you think about it in terms of what had come before it.
Right.
And they sort of went off the reservation and said, we're going to try this, and it worked.
Right.
And I think inevitably, being able to get into partnerships and monetize things, they could do it with Angie Tribeca because the show was great. You could watch that show for 12 hours and be wildly entertained by it. And I think the thing that sometimes gets missed is trying to figure out a way to build more apprenticeships, for lack of a better word. There was something about the directors, there was a bunch of great directors in the 70s because they could cut their teeth in live television in the 50s. So there was a model to follow that was like, well, I did a bunch of live television and now I can go direct a movie. That's Altman and Frankenheimer and those guys.
Right.
And I think what we're missing in some ways is the democratization because of the money. No one then grabs that person and says, I'd like to help make you better at this. And I think you guys are doing it with saying, we're just going to give a deal and then try to be an umbrella that doesn't say, let's change what's interesting about you, but we also can help you do this. And I think sometimes that gets lost, that it has to be great first. Because if it's not great, there's nothing you guys can do with it, no matter how connected we get to the audience.
And Josh, is there a problem like going from a short to a full-length feature in terms of content?
Huge.
Like how many people can make that leap, right? From either television to film or from a short that was funny on YouTube to actually a 90-minute movie, right, that everyone wants to go see. What do you see that?
Logistically, there's a bit of a problem, and you can speak better to this in some ways at Weta. Like, I think technology, there's a problem, but there's also a fairly famous story, and I believe I'm going to do it right. It's Hemingway and Gatsby. Who wrote Gatsby again? Sorry, Fitzgerald. So he writes Gatsby, and he hands it to Hemingway and says, read this for me. Hemingway reads the book, and he says, it's phenomenal, it's one of the best books I've ever read. Lose the first 100 pages. Like, that happened.
Right.
We'll never know what was in it, but he had someone in his life to say, this is great, lose this first 100 pages.
Yeah.
And I think what the lack of it is we can give you all the tools you have, but to turn that tight, perfect 6 minutes
Right.
into an hour and 45 minutes, it takes a lot of people. It doesn't take a lot of people. It takes the right people in someone's life to encourage them to take that 100 pages out of, metaphorically, of whatever they're
We're
in.
attached to the baby, right? And we don't want to let it go. And
And
sometimes
I
you
think
can.
that's the structure that isn't necessarily built out. We're going to have all these avenues for content, and somebody's going to wake up one day and say, I just don't like anything.
Right.
And that's a worry.
Right.
And I know that kids see it right away. I have an 11 and a 9-year-old girls. They are perfect for YouTube. They'll do it all the time. The mark on our iPad says the best thing ever above YouTube. That's literally what my daughter wrote on it. And she will self-select, and I'll eventually look over and she'll watch a vlog or a video game vlog, and by the time I'm coming around and paying attention to it, I'm like, that is better than the one she was watching last week. Right. The production values are better, the guy's more charismatic, and you're like, she sort of filtered through and found the one that was doing it well.
Right.
So to me, it's like talking all the other stuff is great, but getting to story and like how can we do that is my concern.
Right. And Paula, you see the same thing with the films in terms of, the
my
content
gosh.
is paramount.
When you have a good one, it's amazing.
yeah, with all that.
But it's not always like that, unfortunately.
And what do you do, right? You find
gotta
other
work on
ways.
them all.
Yeah, you work on them all and do that. Hamilton, I want to go back to this definition of authentic. What does it mean to be authentic, and how do you know, right? If 6 of us are looking at the same product or all that stuff, how do you get to the authenticity that's so important?
I mean, I think that goes back to the start of any brand. Whoever created the brand, they understand the true essence of what it is. This is raw as at its form, and it should have a soul and a purpose. If it doesn't, people are not going to gravitate towards it. So the authentic piece of that is, what can I give to the fan that they can resonate with, and then allow them to expand upon it? And I think that when people resonate with it, you're not going to capture an entire market, but you will capture those who will become diehard advocates for you, because there's something that they saw in it that they can resonate with, something that can relate to them in a manner by which I see myself as part of that, and I want to self-express my experience with you. And then that just creates a burgeoning effect, and it cascades all over the place.
Ron, I want to go back to the technology. Oh, did you want to say something? And then,
Relative to the brand, one interesting thing that happens in social groups around fans is that they are self-supporting in terms of maintaining the authenticity
Absolutely.
of the brand, right?
Yeah.
It's like we saw that again in Star Trek Continues. It's like they have this incredibly vibrant community online saying like, no, that's not what the engineering console looked like for Scotty. I'm sorry.
One other thing too, I think people who have done it very, very well, and I'll bring in a couple of, I think Beyonce, as a simple example, her Beehive are very, very strong advocates for her. You look at a Bruce Springsteen fan, you look at a Kevin Hart, and how he's motivating people all over the country to do that. And that's the first time I think we've seen a comedian have his own shoe, because he's encouraging people to get out and move and be a part of a bigger movement. And that's called buying into the brand versus buying the brand. And I think that once you get to that stage, you can do a lot of things.
Very cool. Ron, I just want to ask you, in terms of technology, one thing is to have a unique voice. The other is to put it up on a screen, right? To kind of capture that. And is the technology moving forward that if I have a unique voice and I'm in Ohio, can I really do that? How much it's technology, how much is sort of learning the skill of storytelling?
As we mentioned, if you don't have a good story or you have bad production values, then you have a little YouTube video that nobody looks at, But I think that there's 2 parts to that. First of all, YouTube as itself as a platform was like the last missing piece to be democratized, right? I mean, you could make a really high quality piece of media with your tools, but you can only really look at it with your friends or the people you could send a USB stick to, right? YouTube means you can put it out there and literally anybody has the possibility to view it. The other thing here that's interesting, though, is socially, I was part of the founding of a school called Global Cinematography Institute. We were trying to take traditional cinematographers and introduce them to the new digital tools and things like that. What we found was incredibly hard to cross that line with people. And I think that in this thing that we're talking about now with fan-based media and stuff like that, you have fan-based shows, and you've got a lot of people who are professionals in this industry. Some of them, unfortunately, with time on their hands, and they do like to put effort into these things. They like to do, they like to support young people and do things like that. I mean, I personally like to see social media platforms to cross over those 2 groups, and do the kind of mentorship and encouragement that you guys are talking about, And I think that would, and if that was tied into, like sponsorship from a brand or something like that, it could be very powerful.
Very good. So, go ahead.
I was just going to add that in the comedy space, I can think of a writer on The Nightly Show that was staffed because of his very funny tweets. And this guy lived in Indiana, and just had a hilarious Twitter account that people started paying attention to. And we bring in people all the time based on Twitter, and that is just a very lo-fi network of people, but we're trolling it constantly. And then obviously people that end up on the Lenny Letter or have something on BuzzFeed, we're bringing people in all the time. And then another socially relevant show on TBS is Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. And although writer packets have been democratized for a very long time, there's a big emphasis on diversity and trying to, because truly, if you go into any television writer's room, it's very disproportionate in terms of older white dudes, and very hard to get young women and people of color in those rooms. And Sam Bee really went the extra mile, and maybe some of you guys read about this, but the showrunner, with the packet that went out to people, gave samples and very explicit writing instructions for how to complete that packet, which typically doesn't happen. And when you're very quickly reviewing 100 packets for 6 open slots, you just don't have time to read things that aren't formatted correctly. You throw those things to the side because you're working so quickly. And I actually had a really interesting experience just before I came here with one of these presentations that I was saying, we sort of give money to talent and we let them go make something. I'm also a governor on the Television Academy. Good to see you guys here. And we spend a tremendous amount of time, both at the Television Academy and in my day job, talking about diversity and how to bring in younger, more diverse candidates onto our shows. And I have to talk to crews when when department heads are getting ready to staff. We have this conversation. I feel like I'm addressing it daily, and because we were giving such a small amount of money to talent to just say go produce your show, it was very interesting today. I showed up on a set, and it was the most diverse set. They were all millennials, first female boom operator I'd ever seen. I know a few people in features, but on a television set, I've never seen a female boom operator. And this whole crew was filled with people of color. And so I sort of feel like when we die off, it's not going to be an issue, because millennials just, they don't see it. It's just so integral into their lives as you hire younger people. It's going to hopefully somewhat take care of itself.
Well, I think that's a fantastic statement. Also, it kind of wraps up everything. We're going to wrap it up. And just to reiterate, what we're saying, obviously, if you hear it, there's new technologies out there, new voices. You always have to focus on the real, pardon the pun, focus on the great stories, right, and content, but also encourage each other, right? And that's kind of what tonight was about. This is an opportunity in the U.S. for there to be one place where the marriage of entertainment and technology come together. And you're seeing some of the executives that are happening and have it inclusive and tell stories that connect to your audience and find new ways to do that, both socially at the big level with franchises, with all the films that are out there. And I just want to thank our great guests and for your contribution here and talking about things. And take care of everyone for being here.
Thank you, Winston. Thank you for attending. I want to thank our extraordinary panel, Victor, Dina, CSU, and our honorees. Thank you all. Have a great show.